Well, hello. Welcome to Living Faith Midweek Devotions. Today we're continuing in our sub-series for this summer. The main series is called Hitchhiking with the Prophets. And the sub-series, we're on Joseph, our third prophet for the summer. This will be our third and final prophet. And we're in our third week of this Joseph series called Divine Detours. Today I would encourage you to get the background and to study our context much more with Genesis chapters 40 and 41. That will help you understand what I'm talking about today and get you prepped for the message this coming Sunday. There are some seasons in life when it feels like nothing is happening. You pray, but the answer doesn't seem to come. You wait, but the situation doesn't change. You keep doing what is right, but nobody seems to notice. You ever feel like that? And after a while, you may find yourself wondering, God, you have forgotten me, haven't you? Joseph knew that feeling. By the time we reach Genesis chapter 40, Joseph has already experienced one detour after another. His brothers betrayed him. He was sold into slavery. He was falsely accused. And now he's sitting in an Egyptian prison for something he didn't do. But even in prison, Joseph remains faithful. Two of Pharaoh's servants are placed in the same prison, and one morning Joseph notices that they're discouraged. He asks them, "Well, what's wrong?" And God gives Joseph the ability to interpret their dreams. Joseph tells the cupbearer that in 3 days he'll be restored to his position. And then Joseph makes a simple request. Remember me. Please remember me. Joseph wasn't asking for much. Tell Pharaoh about me. Tell him I'm innocent. Help me get out of here. And the cupbearer is restored exactly as Joseph predicted through the dream. But then Genesis 40 ends with these painful words. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. The one thing Joseph asked him to do, just remember me, and he doesn't. Can you imagine? Joseph did everything right. He served faithfully. He helped someone else. God used him. And still, nothing changed. In fact, the next verse says, when 2 full years had passed, 2 years, Joseph wasn't forgotten by God, but he certainly looked forgotten by everyone else. And that's where I think Joseph's story meets ours. Because some of you may be living in Genesis 40 just like Joseph was. You're waiting for something to change. You're waiting for a door to open. You're waiting for God to answer a prayer. You're waiting for a relationship to be restored. You're waiting for circumstances to finally make sense. And the hardest part of waiting isn't always the difficulty itself. Sometimes it's wondering if God sees you in the middle of it. But then Genesis 41 comes and it reminds us of something incredibly important. God's silence is not God's absence. Joseph thought he was waiting for someone to remember him, but God was preparing the moment when Joseph wouldn't need to ask anyone to remember him. Because suddenly, Pharaoh has a dream, even higher up than the Pharaoh's servants of the cupbearer and the baker. Nobody can interpret it. And the cupbearer suddenly remembers. 2 years later, today I am reminded, he said. The very man who had forgotten Joseph suddenly remembers him. Joseph is brought out of the dungeon, and in a matter of hours, his entire life changes. He's standing before Pharaoh. He interprets the dreams that Pharaoh has. He gives wisdom for the coming famine. And then Pharaoh says, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Remember where Joseph was? Started in the pit of the cistern where his brothers left him to die and then trade him for money. Handed him into slavery. Then he's thrown into prison. Think about the contrast. Prison to palace. Forgotten to honored. A slave to second in command. And it all happened because God's timing had finally arrived. Joseph had no idea what God was doing during those 2 years. God knew exactly what he was doing. And maybe that's a lesson we need this week. God doesn't waste the waiting. The prison was preparing Joseph for the palace. The years of obscurity were preparing him for influence. The suffering was preparing him for service. And God was positioning Joseph exactly where he needed to be so that when the famine came, Joseph would be in the right place to serve countless lives, really the whole world. And there's something even bigger happening here. Joseph's story points us toward Jesus. Jesus also experienced rejection, suffering, injustice, and apparent defeat. But what looked like the end was actually God's plan of salvation. Jesus went into the grave, and on the third day he rose again. He was exalted. And because Jesus lives, we know that even we cannot see what God is doing. God is still working. So if you're in a season of waiting right now, don't assume God has forgotten you. Keep praying, keep serving, keep trusting, keep doing what God has placed you in front of you. You may not know what tomorrow holds. Joseph didn't. But you know who holds tomorrow. And this Sunday, we're going to walk through Genesis 40 and 41 together and watch how God takes Joseph from prison to palace, not because Joseph finally got lucky, but because God's perfect timing had finally arrived. And maybe as we look at Joseph's story, we'll discover that the same God who was working behind the scenes in Joseph's life is still working behind the scenes in yours. Your prison is never the end of your story when your story is in God's hands. I'll see you this Sunday.